Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome everyone to another session of the UNAM UK Seminar Series, organized by the Center for Mexican Studies, UNAM, in the United Kingdom. My name is Grecia Suarez, and I'll be your host for today's session. Unfortunately, Dr. Antonio del Rio, director of the center, is unable to join us today, but he sent his warm rewards and best wishes to all participants. This space aims to highlight the contribution of Mexican academics and researchers across different areas of knowledge, promoting an inclusive and equitable perspective. Today, we are delighted to have with us Dr. Jesús Manuel Dorador-González from ENES Juriquilla, UNAM, who will be presenting the talk title, The Situation in Mesoamerica Before the Discovery of America and Development in Science, Technology, and Society During the Colonial Period. Dr. Dorador obtained his PhD from Loughborough University, United Kingdom, and is currently professor at the Faculty of Engineering at UNAM, as well as General Secretary of ENES Juriquilla. He has more than 30 years of experience in research and teaching, coordinating numerous innovation projects and supervising over 175 theses in areas such as design, mechatronics, and product development. His current research interests include processes design, product evolution, and innovation in manufacturing processes. We are very happy to welcome him today and to learn from his perspective and now how science and technology and society evolved from pre-Hispanic Mesoamerica through the colonial period. After this presentation, we will open a space for questions from the audience. Please feel free to share your questions in the YouTube chat. Now, please join me in welcome Dr. Jesús Manuel Dorador-González. The floor is yours.
Grecia, thank you very much for this warm welcome. I am very, very happy to share with you this presentation about what was happening in Mesoamerica and what happened during the colonial period in what is nowadays Mexico, because we need to understand our history, the developments that were done before the conquest of America, the discovery of America, and how we embrace these discoveries, these technological and science advancements in the colonial period in Mexico. So thank you very much for this opportunity. I wanted to start this presentation with this image of the Aztec period, of this wonderful piece that is in the British Museum. So if you are in the UK, please go to this room. It's really wonderful. There are many beautiful examples of the craftsmanship and the technology management that was done in Mesoamerica, in what is now Mexico. First, for putting ourselves in context, this is the American continent, and in the middle part, we have Mexico and Central America. So in this area, we have what was called Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica means the middle of Americas, and is the green thing that we can see in the image. This part is Mesoamerica. The orange part and the purple part are arid America, that is more a desert area. In the green part of Mesoamerica, of this middle America, many wonderful civilizations flourished during a quite long period of time that we have to locate, and we will do that and compare to the division of history that is commonly used in Europe and for understanding the different periods and the advancements of science, technology, and the impact that they had in society. So here we have this map of the Mesoamerican civilizations, and we can realize that there were many important civilizations, the Olmecs, the Mayans, the Aztecs, the Mixtecs, the Toltecs. We will talk some important facts about them. So traditionally, we divide history in prehistory and history. The history is about the year 3000 before Christ to our day. That is when the writing was invented. The ancient age was from the year 3000 to the year 476, when the Western Roman Empire fell. Then we have the medieval age, from the fall of the Western Roman Empire to the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire, that was only 50 years before Columbus discovered America in 1492. The modern age is from 1492 to 1789. That is the French Revolution, and the contemporary age is from the end of the French Revolution to our days. Now, if we want to understand what was happening in the Americas, particularly in Mesoamerica, we have to locate this in this time. So Mesoamerica flourished when Europe was finishing the ancient age and all through the medieval age up to the modern age. So in this purple rectangle, we can see where Mesoamerica is located. And this is very important. I will do a zoom for this. Here we have to understand the different cultures and what was happening in Europe and what was happening here in what is now Mexico and Central America. First, we have the Olmecs from the year 1200 before Christ to the 400 before Christ. This is called the modern civilization of Mesoamerica. Then we had almost at the same time the Mayans, Zapotecs, and Teotihuacan civilizations, when Europe was in the medieval age. So in Europe, cathedrals were built, and in America, in Mesoamerica, pyramids were being built. So we have a difference of about 2,000 to 3,000 years in difference between what was happening in Europe, in the north of Africa, in Egypt, in near Asia, in Mesopotamia, and what was happening in the Americas. Then we had the Toltecs, the Mystics, and at the end, the Aztecs. Maybe the most famous cultures were the Mayans and the Aztecs. But the Aztecs only lasted a few years, from the 1350 to the 1521 AC, when the conquerors won and beat the Aztecs in Tenochtitlan. And after that, we have the viceroyalty of the New Spain, that we were integral part of what is called now Spain. At that moment was called only Castile and Leon and Aragon kingdoms. After that, they were united and they became later Spain. So we were the viceroyalty of the New Spain, all that period of 300 years. So in today's talk, we will talk about this period from the 1200 before Christ to around 1600 after Christ. So let's start with this melting pot of civilization that was this central part of what is now Mexico. With this melting pot of civilizations, we started with the Paleo-Indian before the 3500 AC, with the first settlers in the area. We have found different remains of people that were hunting mammoths, and they left different traces that they were here, so we can trace that up to before the 3500 AC. Then the pre-classic, when the Olmecs flourished from the 3500 AC to the year 200 our time, after Christ. The classic from the 200 to the 900, and the post-classic, the 900 to 1521, with the Aztecs. They had an extraordinary development of agriculture, monumental architecture, writing systems, and calendar complexes that rivaled any world civilization of the same time. So that's very important to take into account. Here in the image, on the left side, we can see a statue that is a huge, a monumental statue of Tlaloc, the god of water, that is outside the Archaeology Museum in Mexico City. In the other side, in the right side, we can see an Olmec head, some very famous buildings of the Mayans in the middle part, and Teotihuacan in the lower part of the image. So, the first civilization, the Olmec civilization, often referred as the mother culture of Mesoamerica, developed along the Gulf Coast and present-day Mexico, in what is now the states of Veracruz and Tabasco. It's a very humid region, so they have very interesting developments in hydraulics. The Olmecs established one of the earliest examples of a stratified society in the Americas, with an elite class that controlled trade, religion, and political power. Their major urban centers, San Lorenzo, La Venta, were ceremonial and administrative hubs that demonstrated complex social organizations and centralized authority. In the technological and scientific achievements of the Olmecs, we have seen in the image, I will put it again, they were pioneers in monumental architecture and sculpture. Most famously for this, the Olmec heads, the colossal stone heads carved from basalt, that is a very hard stone, that required advanced knowledge of transport and stone working techniques. They developed early systems of writing and calendar notation. The Olmecs also made significant advances in hydraulic engineering, and as I was mentioning, constructing drainage systems and platforms to manage water in their very swampy environments. So that's the mother of the different civilizations in Mexico. They have huge impacts on the other civilizations. Now, the Maya civilization. This intel, the Yaxchilan intel, is also at the British Museum. So it's a beautiful, beautiful carving that shows the craftsmanship of the Mayans and the ability to write in these. They are not hieroglyphics, they are more like drawings that were telling us the histories. And here, for example, they represent some very important aspects of their daily life or their religion. Now, the Maya civilization flourished in the Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador. So it was not only in Mexico, but also in Central America. That's part also of the Mesoamerica region. This society was highly stratified, led by divine kings who combined religious and political authority. The Maya established powerful city-states such as Tikal, Palenque, and Copal, connected through trade, diplomacy, and warfare. Their structure supports specialized labor, including astronomers, mathematicians, and scribes, that allowed the Mayans to invent or to discover the concept of zero independently and developed a vigesimal numerical system that allowed them to take a very careful track of the astronomical events. They were able to predict the eclipses, and they had we can see in this image, a very precise calendar with 365 days, years before the European realized that they had small mistakes in their calendar that made them to change from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. The Mayans already had a very precise 365 days calendar. Their achievements in hydraulic engineering included reservoirs and canal systems that supported dense urban populations. In the image, we are looking here the Chichen Itza pyramid that is very famous because in the start of spring, the shadow of the serpent goes down the pyramid, and that happens very precisely. Their buildings were aligned with the stars, with the constellations, making them real good astronomers, able to predict, as I was mentioning, even eclipses and other astronomical events, such as conjunctions of stars. We are looking here the false Mayan arc. They didn't have a real arc for the buildings, but they built something very good for supporting large structures. They also built roads, these white roads, between their cities. They were crossing all the Yucatan Peninsula and Central America, so these white roads allowed the archaeologists to find new Mayan cities, just following the ancient roads. This is very similar to what was happening in Europe with the Roman roads. We had a saying that all the roads lead to Rome. Well, here, all the roads were connecting the different wonderful Mayan cities. All these cities were built in the jungle, as we can see, so the environment was very hard for them to maintain the jungle out of their cities. The soil that they have in the Yucatan Peninsula have these beautiful cenotes that are underground water, and they were considered as sacred places for the Mayans, and they also built canals, they built hydraulic systems for taking the water in and out of the system, of their cities. So the Mayans were really a great civilization that made a huge influence in all their neighbors, such as the Teotihuacan civilization that flourished in the central part of Mexico. In the Teotihuacan society, they had this huge city of around 200,000 people living there. That was located in the Valley of Mexico. It was one of the largest urban centers of these pre-Columbian Americas. The urban city's layout featured the Avenue of the Death, the Pyramid of the Sun, the Moon, and this wonderful temple of Quetzalcoatl, beautifully carved. This is the Pyramid of the Moon. The biggest is the Pyramid of the Sun. They also had very interesting techniques for painting their frescoes in the different buildings that they have. We have discovered that all the buildings were fully colored, and they had in the technological and scientific achievements that the advanced engineering and urban planning included orthogonal street layouts aligned with the sun and with the moon trajectories. This cities alignment show us that they had a deep astronomical and calendaric knowledge used for ritual and agricultural purposes. Additionally, Teotihuacans were skilled metallurgists, potters, and artisans. Their extensive trade networks facilitated the diffusion of technological innovations throughout Mesoamerica. We have found different pottery and carvings of Teotihuacan in very far regions to the south, up to the Mayan civilization, and to the north. So they were very good traders. This civilization disappeared almost suddenly, and the experts are still struggling to define what or why was what happened for ending this wonderful and big civilization. Another very important and not as well known as the Mayans or the Teotihuacans were the Toltec civilization. Here we are looking some images and recreations of Tula, that is just to the north of Mexico, of nowadays Mexico City. The Toltecs inherit and transformed earlier Mesoamerican traditions. They established a militarized state, and that's very important. The other states, the Olmecs and the Mayans, were theocratical. They were ruled by a priest or a god, and here in the Toltec civilization, they were ruled by militaries. So this militarized state was characterized by expansionist policies and a ruling elite that emphasized warrior ideals. Toltec art and mythology, especially the figures of Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, influenced other civilizations, including the Aztecs. The Atlantean figures of Tula that we are looking at in the screen now display very advanced stone carving and architectural skills. The city's layout and the ceremonial centers of the Toltecs reflected astronomical orientations, continuing the Mesoamerican tradition of integrating cosmology with architecture. Now, Tenochtitlan, the big city of the Aztecs. Of course, we are moving here on time. We are talking about several years later, where the Aztecs found this eagle on top of a cactus, eating a snake or birds, depending on the tradition. But they found this symbol in the middle of a lake, in an island, and they were told by their traditions that there, in that place, they had to build their city. And they obeyed this prophecy, and they built this great city in the middle of a lake. That made them or forced them to have wonderful hydraulic knowledge, because they had to build these huge pyramids, roads, temples in a lake. The island was not so big. They started making it bigger and bigger. They created roads, canals, but this lake had a big problem. It was salty in one side of the lake, the north part of the lake, and drinking water in the other part of the lake. So they mixed, the waters were mixed and were useless for them. So they had to bring water from other parts of the mountains surrounding the lake. And they also created dams for dividing the lake into salty and drinking water. In that wonderful city is where the conquerors arrived, led by Hernán Cortés. And they discovered these chinampas that we were looking at the image in a moment, in which they were creating more space for their crops, for agricultural purposes, to get food. Now, The Aztecs were wonderful engineers, architects, hydraulic engineers, but also great warriors, following the tradition of the Toltecs. So they started conquering all their neighbors. They were asking for them to pay taxes, to bring food, to support them. And the neighbors were not very happy with that. They hated the Aztecs. They saw them as tyrants that were stealing their products, their young ladies for human sacrifices, their natural resources, their minerals, their agricultural products. So they hated the Aztecs. So when the conquerors arrived, led by Cortés, many neighboring civilizations decided to get rid of the Aztecs, supporting the European conquerors. So that's the reason why the Aztecs lost and they were defeated at the end, because the other neighboring cultures supported Cortés and the soldiers to finish with these tyrants, dictators of Tenochtitlan. So that was the end of the Mesoamerican civilizations, and we started all the process of conquering, of mixing cultures, and we are in Mexico now, the outcome of this mixture of cultures, civilizations, traditions. In the different images that we saw whilst I was talking, we saw different achievements, different materials, different minerals that they were using. They were really good craftsmen and they did beautiful gold, silver, and precious stones artifacts, such as the ones that we can see here in Mexico in the Anthropology Museum, and you have in London wonderful samples at the British Museum. Here we are looking something that is very relevant, that is paper. The amate paper is quite similar to the papyrus that was used in Egypt for writing and for leaving us the different hieroglyphics and information about them. Here we didn't make hieroglyphics, but we did codices, codex, in which the different traditions and history of the people was preserved. So we can see and we can know what was happening. So we have in this pre-Columbian Mesoamerica very precise calendars. We have dual systems, a 260-day ritual calendar and a 365-day solar calendar, more accurate than the Gregorian calendar used in Europe at the same time. Advanced astronomy with eclipse prediction, alignment of temples, and observatories such as El Caracol that is depicted in the picture in Chichen Itza in Yucatan. So when you visit Cancun, you can go to Chichen Itza. It's a must for all the tourists. And also for us in Mexico, of course. The vigesimal mathematics was very interesting with a base 20 number system, different from the 12-based system used in ancient history in Mesopotamia or Egypt, and the 10th-based used in the medieval Europe. The concept of zero and complex hieroglyphic or graph writing was developed. Regarding technology, we had an agricultural revolution with the domestication of corn, beans, squash, chili, cocoa, and cotton since the year 7000 before Christ. transforming nomadic societies into sedentary civilizations. Monumental architecture, construction of pyramids, temples, and planned cities such as Teotihuacan and Monte Albán, with precise astronomical orientation. All the cities are astronomical orientated. In hydraulic engineering, chinampas, these artificial floating islands for growing the crops. Aqueducts. In pre-Hispanic Mesoamerica, water was made available in towns through aqueducts very similar to the ones used in the early Europe and in the Roman Empire, with the difference of the ark. As I mentioned, we didn't have the ark. In Tenochtitlan was a huge city laid on top of an ancient lake in a volcanic and seismic zone, so the building challenges were huge. These building challenges have been solved by the ancient inhabitants of Mesoamerica, inherited by the colonial during the viceroyalty, and also used nowadays for solving huge hydraulic problems throughout the world. Some ancient Aztec and Toltec technologies were proposed for saving the Leaning Tower of Pisa, for example, and very successfully. Now, there is a point that was told many times, that one of the problems in Mesoamerica is that they didn't knew how to use the wheel. But that is half true. The wheels were used in Mesoamerica, but only in toys, like the little dogs that we are looking there, smiling dogs. They were toys for children. And the wheel was known, but not used for transportation, due to the lack of horses and draft animals. It was used only for children toys, but the wheel was known and used in Mesoamerica in the different cultures that we have. Then we can eliminate a myth here. The wheel was known and used. Now, the arrival of the Spanish, that indeed were not Spanish, were more Castilian or Aragon people, but nowadays it's Spain, and we can call them Spanish. In the beginning of the colonial period, first they conquered Tenochtitlan. In 1521, the Aztec Empire fell under Hernán Cortés, and the neighbor towns or civilizations of the Aztecs that hated them, marking the end of Mesoamerican hegemony. Now, there was a knowledge clash. The introduction of European science in botany, cartography, and medicine started, but it's very important to point that ancient knowledge was incorporated. The religious missionaries that came to what is now Mexico, they came to bring us the Christian religion, but they were not trying to eliminate the previous knowledge or previous beliefs of the people. They were incorporating them. This is a mixture, a very deep mixture of cultures. What we have, this is called the cultural syncretism, with this selective fusion and loss of some indigenous knowledge under the new colonial administration. But fortunately, a lot of the ancient knowledge was preserved by the missionaries and later incorporated. During the contest, the conquest, the war, of course, lots of things were destroyed, but fortunately, many of them were preserved. In the colonial Mexico, in the 1570s, only 50 years after the fall of Tenochtitlan, there was a first major botanical study collaborating with indigenous healers and doctors to catalog more than 3,000 plants. In the Americas, in Mesoamerica, we had lots of herbs and remedies, medicine that were not known by the Europeans. Some of these plants were endemic, so they grew only here, and they were incorporated to the medical knowledge of the world. In 1551, only a few years after, 30 years after the fall of Tenochtitlan, the Royal and Pontifical University of Mexico was created. It was the second university created in the Americas, only a few months after the first one. It was the second largest in America, training Creole doctors, theologians, and scientists. And this is very important, training Creole doctors. So these Creole were the sons of the Spanish born in America. They were also considered as Spaniards, as citizens with all the rights. And having a university here, it was a huge, huge thing. The integrated medicine was also very important with the incorporation of indigenous medical plants such as cocoa, vanilla, and chichona into the European pharmacopoeia. Here we have some examples of the military engineering that was developed in the Viceroyalty of the New Spain for defending themselves of attacks from other European countries that were trying to get the wealth and the different cities that we have here. They were trying to get the riches. There was a lot of piracy, so they had to defend themselves. They started creating different weapons. We saw the weapons that the Spanish bring here, and here we can see the weapons, the original weapons with arrows, axes, made with obsidian. With this obsidian is a very sharp volcanic stone that is very resistant, and it was used for building the weapons. The different protective uniforms are, as we can see here, is based on this indigenous culture. So they had to fight during the conquest with these weapons and with these uniforms, the Spanish with their armor plate armors. The hydraulic engineering was a continuation of what was done in Europe at the time with the arc, with the aqueducts. We are looking here one beautiful images of aqueducts in different parts of Mexico for bringing water to the cities. And this was an improvement because of the full arc instead of the false arc of the Mayans. But also they learned from the indigenous people how to deal with the flooding of the cities. If the Aztecs built a city on top of a lake in a very difficult, muddy soil, they were also able to learn how to do this. And they had, during the Viceroyalty, a huge flood in Mexico City that was finally solved by building canals based on ancient knowledge of the cultures in Mexico. During the Viceroyalty, the Spanish also built something very important, that are the roads, what is called now in Spanish the Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, these royal roads inside the land for crossing all the Viceroyalty and communicate the different cities, mainly the cities in which mining was performed. Nowadays, these royal roads are considered a World Heritage. In the industry, there was also a syncretism because the new inhabitants, the European inhabitants that were arriving, learned how to use the different products, vegetables, solutions that were built, that were grown, in Mexico, in Mesoamerica. And they started building huge facilities for processing, for example, the sugar cane and producing sugar, for producing cocoa, for producing coffee, and all the wonderful products that we are enjoying in all the world, and of course, the chili pepper. So during the Viceroyalty, we had also social and cultural changes, very important, because it was a fusion of indigenous European and African traditions, creating new cultural identities. The pre-Hispanic craft techniques and decorative motifs in colonial art were preserved, and that's very important and very significant. The church as an institution regulated the knowledge and social practices, but also preserved lots of the ancient traditions and made them available to new generations of people that was born in this fusion of Mesoamerican people and European people. The colonial education was very important. The European educational system marginalized but did not completely eliminate indigenous knowledge. So that's also very important. In other conquests from other countries in the world, they just eliminated the past. Here we have a fusion. Of course, the creation of the Royal and Pontifical University of Mexico, that is now the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, was very, very important because we were able to study here and we were also able to create arts, science, and technology from the university. So the scientific challenges and legacies of the colonial period are mainly the epistemic domination, the imposition of European knowledge, and systematic persecution of indigenous scientific practices considered heretical. That was a problem. But as I mentioned, lots of knowledge was preserved, whilst unfortunately others were lost because they were considered heretical. It's important to remember that the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica practiced human sacrifices, and that was not allowed by the Christian religion. In the cartography, they started the creation of detailed maps of the New Spain, documenting natural resources and trade routes. That's also a legacy. And this lays the foundation of modern Mexico for the post-independence Mexican scientific and cultural identity of the 19th century. And that is the beginning of the new Mexican science and technology that started mainly in the 19th and 20th century. In conclusion, Mesoamerica is a living legacy. It was a world center of scientific, technological, and social innovation for millennia, and so most of it was preserved. The viceregal period selectively preserved this knowledge, creating new cultural hybrids. This ancestral legacy continues to inspire Mexican identity, science, and culture today. It's very important to remember that valuing and dissemination this extraordinary Mesoamerican legacy honors the memory of our ancestors and strengthens our cultural identity. Thank you very much for your attention, and I am open to your questions or comments.
Thank you, Dr. Dorador, for such an interesting and insightful presentation. We will now move on to the Q&A session, and I'd like to start with the following question that we have in YouTube. And it says, how were women involved in scientific or technological practices during the colonial era?
The participation of women has always been very important. In the Mesoamerican civilizations, women was not kept at home, but they were a really important part of the decisions, the civilization of ancient Mexico. During the colonial period, it was a big change because women were supposed to stay at home doing things. But fortunately, we have many, many great examples of women during the colonial period that did very important technological and scientific things for the international world, not only for Mexico. They were working together with men, of course, in a peer basis during the first part of the colonial period, maybe the first century or so. After that, in all the world, the women moved more to their homes due to the first industrial revolution, in which the work was, let's say, heavier or more dangerous in the factories. The people started moving to the cities, so it changed. But fortunately, nowadays, we are working in a more equitative environment in which women and men are working side to side to promote, to create culture and technology and science, of course.
Thank you so much. It is very nice to know that women are a part of these changes. Another question, sorry. What do you think is the most common misconception about pre-Hispanic civilization and the relationship with science or technology?
Okay, well, the most common misconception is that they were dumb, or they were not doing things, or they were ignorant. Why is that misconception? Because we don't have writing evidence, papers, or journals with information that they produced at the time. But we have wonderful stone monuments, stone carvings, wonderful craftsmanship in jewels, in buildings that is showing us, and we are still studying all this, the huge technical and scientific capabilities. There is an ancient city in Mexico that calls Xochicalco, that is part of the Toltec civilization, that is a beautiful, wonderful, small, well, not so small, city, pre-Hispanic city, small compared with Teotihuacan, for example. But there is a building there that is amazing, and the scientists are still wondering why and how that was possible. They have carvings all in the sides of that building, in which they are explaining how to assess or how to predict the eclipses. And the most interesting thing there is that we have glyphs. These glyphs are like signatures in stone of different civilizations. We can see that from all the different parts of Mesoamerica and maybe beyond, and that's part of the mystery, there are glyphs showing that the Toltecs, of course, were the owners of the city, but also Mayans, also other civilizations quite far, even Incas from South America, came to Xochicalco to witness this eclipse. But there is also a glyph that is a mystery with symbols representing ancient China. So Do they have relationships with them? We don't know, but there is a glyph, a mysterious glyph that the archaeologists are still studying. So what's one of the misconceptions? That they were ignorant because they didn't have the same level of science and technology that was currently developed in Europe. But in reality, we must be aware, as I put in the first graph with the timing, that we were almost finishing the Stone Age in Mesoamerica, when in Europe they were already in the Middle Age. They were in the Crusades when we were building pyramids. We have to understand the difference in development, because the difference in between Egypt or Mesopotamia and Mesoamerica is more than 10,000 years. So we were upcoming very fast and reaching the same, almost the same levels of technology and science in a shorter period of time. So maybe if the discovery of America had been done 500 years later, now, the advancement could be very similar or almost the same. But that's only a theory because it didn't happen.
Thank you so much. There's another question here. How do you think interdisciplinary approaches combining history, engineering, and anthropology can help us better understand technological development in the past?
Of course, I am a mechanical engineer focused on design, product design, mechatronic design, prosthetics design. And we have to understand where these products are evolving from. So if I am studying an iron, for example, I have to understand that the steam iron comes from an electrical iron that comes from a coal iron, and we can trace this back to the past. And to understand why and how these technological developments affected the society. So we have to understand that these disciplines are not isolated. The sociology or engineering or technological developments and history must be combined to fully understand the scientific and the technological developments and how they affected and moved the society. So we have to work together to understand the past and have a better way of predicting the future. What is going to happen with our products depending on what happened in the past.
That's interesting too. And this is our last question. How does your work in engineering and design inform just your perspective on historical processes of innovation?
How do we do that? Okay, that's interesting. The first stage is to understand the needs of the society, the needs of the customer, the needs of the user, but not the symptoms. But we have to go to the root of the causes for these needs. So we have to understand what's happening with these users, potential customers, and then put all our knowledge, our background in science and technology for proposing new solutions for these problems of the society. When we are able to put together the needs and the potential solutions, we can start creating concepts for solving these problems, for different proposals of concepts. And there we have to be very careful not to choose the first one that we think on. We have to propose more solutions, because if I get in love with my first solution, I will not propose more solutions or more options. So we have to create several solutions and then assess these solutions together with the specifications that we developed for that product, process, service, or whatever we are designing. With this concept already selected, we have to materialize this concept, to do some material tests with the users, with potential users, to have this new design, and later to put all the engineering knowledge for the dimensions, the resistance, and all the processes that we will have to select. So that's a process. It's a systematic process in which we have all to take into account from the beginning of the process in a concurrent engineering environment, all the things that are around. It's not a straightforward process. It's always a circular or a cyclical process that we have to be working on. And if we take the history as an input for this and the previous solutions for the problem, we will get better solutions.
Okay, that's very true. I understand. We have one last question from YouTube.
Yes.
It's from Melanie Bautista. She says, Hi, I find hard to believe that the Olmecs were the first civilization in Mesoamerica because they are not that ancient compared to Mesopotamia. Do you think there were others before? And says thank you.
Yes, of course. There were other people around Mesoamerica, but maybe 10,000 years after Mesopotamia. It's not as ancient. Remember that the first humans started in Africa, and they started traveling to to Mesopotamia, Egypt, and all these regions. They kept walking towards Asia, and they crossed the Bering Strait 10,000 or more years after the early civilizations. But the people that was in America, they were nomads, and they were just chasing the animals for hunting and eating, and the better places for getting their crops cultivated. So we don't have lots of information about these nomad people because they left only a few traces like arrowheads or spears or these kind of things. But the first established civilization was the Olmec civilization, and that was a wonderful civilization, and the archaeologists are still struggling to understand how they were able to carve these colossal heads 2 or 3 meters high in a very hard stone without metal tooling. And that's something interesting because basalt is very difficult to carve without metal, and they didn't have metal. How they carved these huge heads is still something to be studied.
Thank you so much. Well, I think we have to finish. Thank you very much, Dr. Dorador, for this insightful presentation and for sharing your perspective on the evolution of science, technology, and society from Mesoamerica to the colonial period. We also like to thank to the ENES Juriquilla for the continuing collaboration and support, and of course to all of you who joined us today from different parts of the world. We hope you enjoyed this session of the UNAM UK seminar series, and we invite you to follow our upcoming talk through our social media and YouTube channel, UNAM UK. Thank you very much, Dr. Dorador. It was a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much,
again. Thank you again, and see you the next time.
Bye-bye.